So why don't we first get you all to introduce yourselves. Nathan, let's start with you. Introduce yourself and tell us kind of a little bit of an idea of your role and how it contextualizes into this discussion.
Sure. So I lead the strategic insights function for Pepsico across Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. It's one of these fantastically vague titles that doesn't tell you anything about what we actually do. But what we really do is we tackle big macro topics that affect our strategy as it cuts across our business. So that's across our three categories, so snacks with brands like Lay's, Walkers, and Doritos, beverages with our colas, waters, energy drinks, and nutrition with oats and juices and dairy, across more than 50 markets. So that's a really diverse kind of tapestry of our business. So we look at topics like trend spotting. So I need to find Dr. Rosenberg afterwards and talk to him. We look at things like building capabilities around growth channels, but marketing effectiveness has probably been the top of our agenda for the last few years, which is where measurement is close to my heart.
Aji?
So I'm Aji Ghosh. I'm head of research and analytics at Sky. Essentially, my department is part of Strategic Insights, which is the group that's responsible for exec insight. So the types of problems that my quant researchers and data scientists and artificial intelligence scientists focus on are optimization challenges. So Sky has a bunch of different things it wants to do. Some of them have billion-pound revenue implications. Others have multi-million-pound advertising implications. Others have not much implication at all. And it's one of prioritization of understanding what is important, what isn't, and also doing the right research and analytics to help our marketers and our chief marketing officer, as well as our CEO, who was our former chief marketing officer. So it's really about simplifying a very complex story so that they basically understand what the next decision is.
Okay, and Simeon?
Hi, I'm Samir Duckworth, and I'm Global Head of Analytics and Strategy at Essence. And for those of you who don't know, Essence is a media agency which is part of WPP's Group M family of media agencies. It's quite a young agency. It's it was only founded in 2005 when it kind of spun out of Lloyd's Bank, if you believe that. It's amazing kind of journey that we've been on. And it's quite unusual as well because we're rare in the sense that we're founded as a digital media agency, and we're kind of transitioning now into the world of full-service media agencies. Our clients, you'll know us by, main client will be Google globally. We do a lot of digital marketing for Google. BT in the UK, and also NBC Universal. And I guess my role is to help those clients, use data to make, decisions, better decisions in a new era of marketing.
Okay, so we're going to take a tiny step back in time, about 3 years or so, because the title of this session is Exploring Organizations that have arrived at a measurement strategy that is fit for purpose. So you've arrived, but at some point you were on the way to here. So let's go back, let's wind it back about past 3 years and just take us through the journey that has meant that you are now at this fit for purpose strategy, Nathan.
Well, I don't think we've arrived. I think we were talking about it a little bit before. It's really important to emphasize that this is a journey. I think there's just too much changing for there ever to be this kind of panacea that you arrive to that's going to give you every answer to every question that you need. But if I were to rewind 3 years ago, we were kind of starting in a situation where we had as many KPIs and tracking metrics as there were kind of combinations of brands and countries, which is to say there are just a lot of them. And they were all good at answering certain questions, but less good at answering others. But what the business was left to really deal with was a flood of information. You could always find an answer to support the position that you were trying to push forward if you looked closely enough through that data, but really the context just wasn't there. So our business wasn't really able to make those decisions based on the most effective information possible. So what we went about doing was organizing ourselves. And that really began with creating kind of a culture and a language for how we talked about marketing effectiveness. And that started with really being very explicit about the decisions that we needed to make as an organization, from the most high-level macro allocation strategies all the way down to within a particular campaign. And we really mapped those out, and we took a lot of time to understand the human beings and the organization that were making those decisions, because that helped us understand quite a bit about what was the most simple but least complex, to steal one of John's phrases, answer that we would need to be able to make that decision better. So when we kind of started with that blank sheet of paper, we drew all of that out, and we kind of compared that to what we had at the moment. Found we had concentrations of measurement and capability where you'd expect them. So a lot of short-term ROI measurement, a lot of equity tracking, a lot of measurement of various content, assets, et cetera. We say at PepsiCo that we are best in class at doing everything somewhere, but at none of those things everywhere. So we, first of all, kind of mined through that to find good capabilities, but that left a lot of questions that we just didn't have an answer to, particularly when we think about audience-driven activation, like being really purposeful about touch points and serving the right content to those audiences at those touch points. So we had to fill those gaps. And as we've gone on this journey, I think we've realized some really important things. And maybe the most important is this kind of embracing change. So our consumers are changing. The way that they interact with brands is changing, their expectations and where they meet brands and engage, that's changing every day. Our strategy changes. We're competing more and more with niche businesses that operate in a different way than the large food and beverage players that we would typically compete with. So we've had to, again, create a bit of a culture where we're not going to arrive at a destination. We're going to continue moving along a path. Important part for us being telling that story in a linear way that makes sense. So it doesn't feel like we're making massive swings in terms of what we measure and how we make decisions, but that it continues on a fairly stable path.
So at Sky, the journey started with basically very simple steps. Initially, we had a massive econometrics function that did a lot of fancy analysis. We had my research area, and then we had customer analytics, and they all sort of did their analysis independently and don't really communicate, and we all sort of send it to the execs via different routes. Now, to take a step back, Sky's fairly big, and we have a fairly sizable marketing budget as well. I personally have about 50 managing director level stakeholders who all have very different interests, KPIs, and a bunch of other metrics that they just like to sort of track. Back then, we approximately had about 2,000 to 3,000 metrics, and then there was an exec sort of led project about sort of essentially boiling that down to the top 12 KPIs. Now, we didn't quite reach 12 top KPIs, but we came close. We ended up with 30 KPIs. However, given that Sky essentially has mobile, broadband, TV, I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, we have a lot of different things. We then essentially developed a network of KPIs that covered not just research, but also econometrics, customer analytics, et cetera. But the most important thing about that network is that it's pretty much alive in the sense that it develops as it ingests more and more data. But also over time, this network starts to understand, okay, for mobile campaigns of a particular tier, let's say a £2 or £3 million campaign, these are the KPIs that are really important at driving prospect activation, for example. Or for Sky Cinema, actually, don't worry about these KPIs. These ones are more important. And over time, this network is getting better and better, and it's helping us have common language as well. And it forms one of the key things to the CMO dashboard.
How did 30 become acceptable?
We went through a massive reorg. So we started off with 900 people in the insights function, and now we have about 140. So some of the KPIs sort of organically disappeared. But I mean, more realistically as well, people started understanding that, okay, these are the KPIs that you like, but are they driving anything? Because all the analysis has shown, our internal analysis has shown, a few consultancies then corroborated and checked our homework essentially, and they found the same thing. So we were basically in a situation where we said, okay, you can give us X amount of money, but then you are basically telling us to track stuff that's useless. And by the way, we're going to say that to our chief marketing officer as well.
Okay, Simeon.
So I'm the same. We haven't arrived at any particular destination of having the answer. But I think that, again, looking at John's chart, our journey is almost going in the opposite direction to a lot of people. We started off as a digital media agency, and therefore test and learn was completely in our blood, particularly one that works for Google. We test everything. We test, whether that's performance campaigns or brand campaigns. We have randomized controlled trials on just about everything you can manage and measure obsessively. And that's great. It's so great that, in fact, we found that at the time the industry didn't have the right brand measurement to do what we wanted. And so we had to create our own brand measurement to measure the effect of digital on brand uplift. So we have come from a culture which was obsessively analytical about how you make decisions through a very experimental basis. Sometimes you can get lost, you can't see the wood for the trees for those experiments. So we found very useful having programs which we call learning agendas, where you kind of stitch together programs to investigate a theme across multi-years, multi-products, etc. Again, very experimental and test and learn in its approach. So, for example, one of the things that we looked at a few years ago was, how can digital be better at driving brands? And as we've done a lot of experiments on brands and what drives brands, we were able to go to another stage and say, what are the signals that can predict brand uplift that you can actually action? So, whether people are scrolling on a page or whether the ad is viewable, or there are thousands of things that you can look online that allow you to predict whether an ad might be give you a brand uplift. And we were able to do that. Again, obsessive testing means that we could find out that something was causal, as near as it possibly could be in terms of a randomized controlled trial approach. And the great thing about that is it laid the bedrock for us to be able to use genuine machine learning in a stage now, where you can say, if we can work out what the factors are that predict brand uplift, you can let the machines find out where that is. And we've kind of massively reduced the cost of being able to generate a brand uplift, and therefore made brand advertising more available to more of our advertisers online. That's where we were. As I say, we are transitioning in the other direction. So we're kind of now encountering the problems and challenges that I spent most of my career looking at, which are more about, less about efficiency and more about growth and how you inspire growth. And the way that we're approaching that is we're taking the culture of analytics, which we've kind of developed right at the beginning, and beginning to apply that to these new challenges, which and lessons that we already know about some of the things that do drive growth. So, for example, we've talked a bit about Ehrenberg Bass and Bar and Sharp. We know that that is really important in what drives growth, and we know that actually that's quite different from what is the pure digital efficiency mindset. But what we do think is that culture of analytics can help us approach that problem in a slightly different way. And I think it's quite interesting, when I think about what has changed in terms of the culture of measurement. When years ago, many years ago, I was at Ogilvy. We were working with Andrew Ehrenberg when he was first coming up with all of that research in the 90s. And actually, as I remember, the strand of work was called Justifying Our Advertising Budgets. And actually, that's what's changed, is that we've gone from a very sort of arrogant way, which is we're right, we just need to prove it, to something where we now need to admit we don't know all the answers, and actually data can help us steer us. And so it's about using data to inform our decision making, and that's really the big change. And it changes the whole measurement culture in our view. Yes, I think it makes prediction, as we were talking about earlier on, really important. We need to design measurement to be able to enable more prediction. That means that you need to measure more things. It also means you need to do different type of analyses, and you can't often just do it yourself, particularly as a client. You have to look outside of that. We're going to see a bit later on, I haven't seen it yet, but when Les presents the meta-analysis of the 60-40 and whether it's 70-30 or for whom it is now, that for me is a fantastic example of what the future will look like, where you say no one brand can predict from just looking at itself. First-party data is not enough. We need to work together to be able to see some of these predictions. The second thing that I think we're beginning to pay more attention to around when we try to make data more useful for decisions is actually something that the IPA have been promoting a lot over the last few years, which is behavioral economics. Actually, if there are human biases about using data, they are all over our industry about how people use stuff. And I think paying more close attention to those biases will help us combat some of the things that we consistently see. As John said, some of the questions that I think we're facing, we were asking about how finance and marketing work together 20 years ago. Why hasn't something changed? And some of that is to do with these biases, I think. not all of it, some of it's to do with its structures, but some of it is to do with how we process information. So the long-term or the sustainable value is a great example of that. It feels remote to people when you say grow market share by 2 percentage points over 3 years, or widen your margin by 30 basis points over 5 years, mostly in Africa, or whatever it might be. People just phase it out. We need to choose KPIs that make growth feel really present and urgent right now, because making a disruptive change to what we do is the exception, not the rule. And mostly what we end up doing is believing in a big change, but doing something which is totally incommensurate with driving that change. So KPIs are not just business metrics, they need to be metrics that actually stimulate that change. And then also, I think, again, when we talk about the long term, I think it challenges the measurement and our analytics in terms of the types of analytics that we should be doing. I think that we focus a lot on what is the effect of the long term, whether it's multiplier 3 times or 4 times. How big is it? Lots of clever ways of pimping econometric models to answer that. Actually, I think the real answer is about understanding how that change is really occurring, understanding the mechanism of it, because only when we can see how, if we change this with this group of people, play out, we can make the future seem more real today. And so those are the kind of things that, as we're sort of transitioning in the other direction, we're kind of starting from a digital world and actually encountering all the problems that everybody else in the room has had for years. And it's kind of trying to approach that in a slightly different way.
Nathan, how easy is it then, when, as the client, to kind of sift through all this data that's available there and all these human biases that are coming into analysing the data, the change in attitudes by the agencies as well, by your admission, Simeon, and arrogance perhaps had to be diffused. How easy is it now then to trust what's out there and kind of filter through the noise?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult, because I think almost anything we do, there might be 3 or 4 different eyes on it doing some type of measurement, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing our own measurement. Our agency is going to be doing their own measurement. The media platform that we're buying on are going to be doing their own measurement. These are all going to potentially provide very different answers to how successful or not something was and why. We've had to, I think it comes to a bit of governance. It's not around saying that there's one way that everybody needs to adopt, but we've needed to take some stands, I would say, and identify certain things that we just are not willing to believe in. And that's not because we know for sure. We talk a lot about best current thinking. We're very open about the fact that what we're doing is evolving, but we also need to make sure that the data that informs those decisions and the way that it's measured and the methodology, et cetera, that we feel that it's sound.
So I'm kind of interested. How do you synthesize all those multiple voices? What's the way in?
Well, I would say we have a few metrics, and John talked to a few of them that we really feel are kind of stakes in the ground. We measure those things on a regular basis, and what the team and I are always trying to do is look at other signals that are coming through and try to figure out which of these signals are impacting that end goal the most. And again, it's not to say that we have the perfect answer. It might be, a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. But we're trying to continuously learn as best we can and just create as many signal loops as we can so that we can learn more in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, from our side, collaboration with the partners is extremely important. But it's also one of the real challenges, because Sky, over the last sort of 18 to 20 years, has built up a lot of legacy systems, which makes it very difficult for us to collaborate internally, let alone with our external partners. So that is something that we have most definitely not solved. And in fact, we've just recently appointed, probably last week, a new managing director to own that for the company. But it's also one where I think third-party partners need to sort of do a bit more to sort of collaborate with us, because obviously, an organization like Sky can't sort of adapt its system to multiple partners constantly. It needs to have that flexibility. Yeah. So that essentially our CMO does have all of these that are absolutely critical.
I think that collaboration point is really important. I mean, I think, when I first kind of joined the business, I found that there were a lot of, we had an analytics team sitting alone, running their models, coming up with an answer. Our agency was kind of doing the same, kind of the situation I described before. We're all around a table a lot more than I think we used to be, and that genuinely helps us. You know, I don't know if it's quite a swarm, but it definitely helps us get to a better answer than we were getting to before.
I think the collaboration point is a real challenge for agencies, actually, because mostly what we do is we compete to be different, and actually we like to have things that are ours and that you can only get from us. And as you say, the world is going into a different place where we need to be able to share data. It's going to a different place where actually you can't have a unique insight or a unique analytics team. I think it's going to a different place where actually we used to value analytics being an independent thing, but it's becoming so bound up with decision making. It's a collective enterprise, and so it's about new partnerships. And I think that's going to be a big change for our industry, because to forge those new partnerships, again with the reality from an agency perspective, we need to have a relationship with clients which is more long term. Because if you give up more stuff, then actually you have to get something back in between. And so if we are all mutually investing into client relationships with our data and our teams, there needs to be some change on both sides. And I think that's the phase that we're going into that's got to be different.
We have about 3.5 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Not one? I'm going to get a microphone to you, just so everyone at the back can hear as well. We'll dash one down to you. I think I know what your question is, though. If you wouldn't mind standing up and give us your name as well.
Hi, I'm Jill from Frame. Ajay,
Hold it a bit closer, sorry.
If you had to pick one metric down from the 900 to 30, what would the one be?
So from the research side, the one metric that we've constantly found to be very useful is intention to purchase. It's a very simple question, but over the last 8 years, and I've been a Scout for 4 years, a variety of analysis have shown that it's consistently high performing.
Any others? Okay, so I'm going to ask one final question, because one of the questions, I think we started off saying, how do you know when you've got there, when you've got to that point, and went back into your journey? Should the goal never to be to have arrived at a point? Is it just, this is an evolving industry and will continue to be, and the moment it stops evolving and changing, that's when you should be worried? Simeon?
Absolutely. I mean, it's learning. So in the end, if the day you stop learning or want to learn is the problem. And I think that's the hidden kind of benefit of a more experimental culture, is it starts off by at least admitting I don't know. And I think that a lot of the things that we've done, which is back to that justify advertising, starts off with the idea we're right, but we just need to know how right we are. And I think the experimental piece and the test and learn thing is openness to new ideas. And ultimately, you're never through when you're in there.
And does that work equally with Sky, Ajay, in terms of, I know Sky has specific goals. Disclosure, my husband works for Sky, and obviously I'm in the media anyway, but so it is a business that is very focused on expanding the market, and having certain goals that actually don't change.
Yeah, no, it's still the same. I mean, Sky has a lot of different high-level aspirations, but the thing is we're always still learning. The measurement strategy itself has to adapt to not only the business strategy, but also the new business culture, but also the new business organization. And collaboration, new technologies, those kind of things will help us develop and learn.
And Nathan, you get the final word. Yeah. Where should we go next? What should be the goal, if there should be one?
Well, I almost think that I struggle with the concept of a goal in itself almost, because we will have arrived and we can stop maybe when our business ceases to exist, because the fact is that we're going to have to continue to adapt, as I mentioned before, as the landscape changes, as our competitors are different. I think when we're able to draw, I think the closest we can even strive to get to is if we are able to draw really clear, tangible conclusions from the most upstream metric to that profitable growth that John talked about, and be able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that by pulling this lever, I can impact that what we're going to report to the street at the end of the day. That's a goal that I think we should strive for. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But ultimately, I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Nathan, Simeon, Ajay, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you as well.